Hey everyone, so it's Hearth and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a quarterly book breakdown where I sit down and talk about all of the witchcraft books that I've read, finished, started to read during the last quarter, so that hopefully I can give you a little bit of extra information about whether I like a book, whether I didn't, and the reasons for or against each of the books that I've been reading, so that you can have a little bit of extra information about whether that book is going to be suitable for your research and your magical practice. So this topic has been requested quite frequently over the past few months because I do read a lot of witchcraft books, but I don't do that many reviews on the subject, mainly because when I read a witchcraft book, I don't read it the same way as I would read a novel. When I'm reading a novel, I will read it from cover to cover, whereas when it comes to witchcraft books, I will typically read a chapter here, a chapter there, a bit here, a bit there, and ultimately it can take me a really long time to finish a book all the way through. So unless I'm reading it for a particular video, usually it will take me anywhere from a year to 3 years to finish reading a book, because I try to read like 12 books at once, and I think we can all acknowledge that reading 12 books simultaneously isn't helpful, and usually it means that I forget to finish book after book after book. But I have started to note down my experiences with books, whether I'm enjoying them or not, the things I like about them and the things I don't like about them, and that is what we are going to be going through today. Now, if you have any better names for this style of video, feel free to let me know, because although usually I'm not that bad with names, I cannot for the life of me figure out what to call this series. So if you have any ideas, feel free to put it down in the comment section. Now, before we fully dive into the books, I do just want to put a little disclaimer here that these are my experiences with these books based on my own practice and my own tradition. And everyone is going to have a different experience with these books. Some books are going to be more suitable for you, your practice, your tradition than others. So when I'm talking about these books, if there's a book I didn't like or something I didn't like about it, that only applies to me, and it might not apply to any of you. So if you do see a book in this list I'm going to be talking about that you had a good experience with, then I'm really happy that that book worked for you, but it didn't work so well for me. And if there's a book in here that I really enjoy, you might not. So just make sure that you always do your research on not only the book, but also the author, just to make sure that the style of writing and the style of practice is going to suit what you want. Because especially today, when there's tens of thousands of witchcraft books readily available to all of us, it can be really easy to assume that all books are going to be good for us, when in reality, a book can be good, but it isn't necessarily good for everyone. With that being said, let's get started. Now, I'm not going to bring up any actual books in this video, mainly because a lot of these are digital. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to stick a photo of the book in so you can see what I'm referring to as I'm talking about it, because it's going to make this a whole lot easier. But any books that I do talk about today will be in the description box with the name and their author so that you can find them. Even if I didn't like a book, you might, so it's well worth checking out the description. Plus there's loads of useful bits of information in the description as well if it's something that you are interested in looking into a little bit more. So with that all being said, let's look into my book reading list from August to the end of October to see the kind of books that I've been reading. Up first is a book on candle magic. This is Candle Magic for Beginners, Spells for Prosperity, Love, Abundance, and More by Mystic Dylan. Now, many of you who've been on this channel for a while will have seen me react to Mystic Dylan's content. I do believe that they were a part of both a Skylife video and an Anthony Padilla video, both of which I will link up here, and I thoroughly enjoy their content, just a genuinely lovely person. So when I found out that they were writing books, I was like, I need to get these books. So I do believe that there are two currently. There's a candle magic book and a manifestation book. I haven't started the manifestation book, but I have started the candle magic book. I'm about halfway through, and so far I'm really enjoying it. This book is designed for those who are interested in getting started with candle magic. If you are already well versed in candle magic, you might find it to be a little bit basic, but the reality of this book is it's designed to be a starting off point for people who are really interested in getting started. And I found this book to be incredibly insightful. The way it's written is really open and accessible, and I find that that's really enjoyable, especially having read so many books that are very questionable in their tone. I really like this one. It's really open, it's really easy to read, it really pulls you in, and it makes you feel like you want to learn more. I think a lot of us will have read those books where it sounds like the author is talking down at us. This book is not like that at all. It's very open, it makes you want to read more, it makes you feel comfortable. And so far it's covered about candle colours, different types of candles that you might want to use, the different ways you might want to use them. It incorporates different tools and correspondences that you might want to use, and generally so far I'm really enjoying it. I'm not a huge way in, but from what I have read so far, I do really like it, and I'm expecting that I will continue this book so that when I get round to the next quarterly book breakdown, I will have even more information on it as to whether or not I really like it or I really didn't like it. But so far, there isn't much that this book can do that's going to make me not like it. A lot of people do ask me if I have any candle magic book recommendations, and so far I haven't read all that many candle magic books, but of the ones I have read, this one's probably the one that I'm drawn to the most. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how it progresses. Obviously, I'm not super far into it yet. I think I'm just shy of halfway through, so I'm really excited to see how it progresses. But so far, I really like it, and I'm definitely going to be checking out the other book that Mystic Dylan has written as well, because if I really like the style of writing in this one, I'm hoping that I'm going to like it in another one. The second book that I want to talk about is called Spells from the Wise Woman's Cottage, An Introduction to West Country Cunning Tradition. Now, that name really makes you think that it's going to be an introduction into West Country Cunning tradition. And I didn't fully look at the information about it before I bought it, because I did buy it when I was in Glastonbury and it was a really busy shop, and I just grabbed the book and I thought it looked really interesting. Now, this book is not entirely as useful as it might first sound, because the Wise Woman's Cottage that it's referring to isn't any kind of historical location. Instead, it is the Wise Woman's Cottage as seen within the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle. In Boscastle, I've never had the chance to go. There is a witchcraft museum. It's world famous, really. And in this museum, there is an exhibit called The Wise Woman's Cottage, and it is essentially a representation of the items and the symbolism that would probably have been found within a wise woman or a witch's cottage during the time period. It's a really interesting read. It just isn't entirely what I was expecting it to be, so this is just a little bit of a forewarning for that. I initially thought that it was going to be about Cornish witchcraft that was done within the Wise Woman's Cottage, Cornish witchcraft that was done within the home, and it's more about the creation of the exhibition, The Wise Woman's Cottage, as is seen in the Boscastle Witchcraft Museum. So just take note of that before you do buy it, buyer beware. It is a really small book. I read it in about 2 hours and I did really enjoy it. It contains some historical spells, as well as going into the items and the symbolism that would have been a part of witchcraft within the time period that have been incorporated into this exhibition. It's a really interesting book in the right context. If you're interested in the Witchcraft Museum in Boscastle, then you're going to be really interested in this book. But if you were expecting it to be a book about Cornish witchcraft and be really super practical and useful and educational, you might be a little bit disappointed, so just go into it with the right context. Generally, I found it a really enjoyable book. It just kind of threw me off a little bit because it was not at all what I was expecting. The next book we're going to be talking about is Pagan Portal's Hedge Witchcraft. Now, I got this book about 10, 11 years ago. I think I got it in 2011. And at the time, I thought it was the bee's knees. I thought it was so good. And now I'm rereading it and I'm realizing I really don't like it. And I think that just goes to show how our perspective on a book is going to vary depending on our experiences. At the time, I had never read another Hedge Witchcraft book, so I didn't know how much better some other books were, and so I thought it was a really good book. And now I'm rereading it, I don't like it half as much, and I'm going to give you a few reasons for that. The first thing is, I think it's important to note that when it comes to Pagan Portal books, they're really small. This book is only 87 pages long, and when you consider that in the grand scheme of standard books, standard witchcraft books especially, they're usually around 250 to 300 pages. Some books are obviously much longer, but this book is really small, so just take note of that. I know that some people really like reading small books because it makes them feel accomplished and it doesn't make them feel overwhelmed, whereas other people will find that this book is simply too small and too vague, and that's really going going to depend on your style of reading. My general issue with this book was that one of the main aspects of hedge witchcraft is hedge riding. And having spoken to dozens of hedge witches and read a lot of books on hedge witchcraft, it seems that most people feel the same way. Hedge witchcraft is hedge witchcraft because of the hedge riding aspect. To remove the hedge riding aspect, it's more like green witchcraft than it is hedge witchcraft. And this book actually states that it doesn't talk about hedge riding, and then if you want to learn about hedge riding, you should buy the other book that they've written on hedge riding. Now, I don't think this is an author problem. I think this is a logistics problem. All Pagan Portal books are really tiny, usually less than 100 pages. I think it's simply that hedge riding is such a large topic that it needed a book in its own right, and all Pagan Portal books are really small. It wouldn't have made sense to put them both in one book, because there simply wouldn't have been enough space to give the information and the context that it deserved. However, it is a little bit dodgy when I see a book about hedge witchcraft, and it says about 5 or 6 times throughout the book that if you want to learn about hedge witchcraft, you need to buy another book. Whereas most books on hedge witchcraft will talk about the physical practice of hedge witchcraft and the astral or hedge riding aspect of witchcraft in the same book. And if you were to buy both this book on hedge witchcraft and the book on hedge riding, it's probably more expensive than buying a singular book on hedge witchcraft where they're both combined, if that makes any sense. That's the big thing that I didn't really like about it, simply because of everyone I've spoken to, they've essentially told me that hedge witchcraft isn't hedge witchcraft without hedge riding. So to take the hedge riding out of a book on hedge witchcraft, it doesn't make all that much sense. Now, the book itself is really quite vague. It discusses things like sacred trees, the wheel of the year, the elements and their symbolism, about how witches don't need tools. It does talk about how this is modern hedge witchcraft, blending folkloric practices with modern solitary magic. And then it goes into a little bit of a herb grimoire, a little bit about learning divination, but generally my main consensus on it is that it's so unbelievably vague. And I do worry that the people who read this, who are maybe very new, might come away being more confused than they started with. The best example for this that I can have is that it says, cast a circle, charge with energy, visualize, but it doesn't actually tell you how. It has all marks of a beginner witchcraft book, but without any of the comprehensive beginner witchcraft information. And so you might come away from this book thinking, okay, I need to cast a circle, and then realizing that within the book it never actually tells you how to do that. So the book itself isn't absolutely awful, I'm just confused as to who it's aimed at. Because if it's aimed at a beginner's going to come away being more confused than they started off with, because they don't know how to visualize, they don't know how to work their energy, they don't know how to cast a circle. The book tells them that they need to, but it doesn't tell you how. But if you are more advanced and you already know how to visualize, you know how to cast a circle, you know how to charge with your energy, then this book is going to be so vague, it's not going to be of any use to you if you do already know the basic principles. So I'm generally just a little confused as to who this book is for. If you are going to get it, I do think it's a relatively interesting read. I think it's interesting to see hedge witchcraft from an individual's perspective, and that's really what all books are. It's witchcraft through the perspective of the author. So I think it can be useful and interesting for that reason, but I would say that if you are wanting to deep dive even further into hedge witchcraft, don't use this as your sole resource. And if you are a beginner, I would recommend using a beginner resource alongside it. If you're interested in energy work, then something like Psychic Witch is good. If you're interested in folk witchcraft and traditional witchcraft, then something like The Crooked Path could be really good. It's just important to balance it with other things, I think is really what I'm trying to say with this. So not terrible, I'm just a little confused. I've come away from it rather baffled as to who it's aimed towards. Next up is probably one of my favourite books of all time, and that is Traditional Witchcraft, A Cornish Book of Ways by Gemma. Now, many of you who are interested in traditional witchcraft will have likely read this or at least have seen it. And I've loved this book since the moment I got it, and I'm actually rereading it. This is my second time through, and I still absolutely love it. Now, I'm chipping away at it slowly but surely in my spare time, and I still love it. It's still so good. Now, this isn't a book that is for those of you who want a step-by-step guide. This isn't a book for those of you who want a beginner's introduction to traditional witchcraft. This is more of a historical, archaeological, anthropological, evidence-based book all about how traditional witchcraft was likely practiced within Cornwall during historical times. And it's truly fascinating. Now, it ties a lot in with the Boscastle Witchcraft Museum, which I mentioned earlier with the spell book from the Wise Woman's Cottage. They both discuss information about the Witchcraft Museum and its relation and its connection to the history of Cornwall. Because when it comes to witchcraft, the Witchcraft Museum at Boscastle has a huge amount of information taken from people within the community, taken from historical evidence, taken from second or third-hand accounts from people who've had witches or wise folk within their family, who've had stories passed down. It's a fantastic collection of information about what is essentially a very unique style of magical practice. This talks about the mindset, the way things were used, the items that were used, why they were used. It talks about the very culturally specific things that occurred within Cornwall. What a lot of people don't realise if they're outside of the UK is that every single county of England is exceptionally different. The magic practiced in Cornwall is different to that of Somerset, which is different to that of Staffordshire. There's so many different styles of practice across the country, and this really focuses in on the particular style that was seen within Cornwall. Now, Cornwall has a really rich and diverse magical culture. They have so much history and legacy that goes back through the centuries, and this book really encapsulates all of that. So if you are interested in the folkloric and the historical accounts of witchcraft and how the things that we are finding and learning today may tie in with how things were done historically, this book might be for you. And Gemma is just a phenomenal author. They've done so many other works that I would also thoroughly recommend. So this one is very much in the yes pile for me. I really, really enjoyed it. This time we have another Gemma book, and that is The Black Toad. Now this one kind of leads on from the Cornish Book of Ways book that I was just talking about. The Black Toad is all about the different forms of magical practice that was undertaken by Cornish witchcraft practitioners. Now, this book is mainly focused on the type of workings that they would do, and it's split into three main parts. Old Mother Redcap being about protections and defences, Old Mother Greencap being about green witchcraft and herbalism, and Old Mother Blackcap being about hexes, curses, and other baneful magics. Now, it's a really interesting book. However, whether you can get anything out of it practically is another matter. For me, I personally wouldn't use anything in this book directly because it does discuss that during the time period when these spells and rituals were in use and when they were preserved, Christianity was a big part of traditional culture at that time. And so almost every single spell within this book will include aspects of Christianity, usually including the Son, the Father, and the Holy Ghost. Now, for any of you who are interested in traditional witchcraft and Christianity and will use them together, this book could be absolutely phenomenal. I, however, am not going to use this book as a practical guide. Instead, I more use it as a historical view into the world of Cornish witchcraft during the time period. I think it's a really fascinating book and I will definitely continue to read it. It's not my favourite book on traditional witchcraft, but that doesn't mean it's not valid and useful in its own right. It covers the types of practices and traditions that were undertaken by people of that time. People that were between the pre-Christian world and the Christianized world. People who were drawing on pre-Christian traditions as well as modern Christian beliefs. And so I think it's a really important snapshot into that time period. I just don't find it practically all that useful. If you are after a book on more of a historical perspective, this could be really good. If you're looking for a practical 101 guide, then this might not be for you. So it's going to all depend on how you want to use that book and whether or not you find the Christianized style of practice to be suitable for you or not. But I know that for some of you who do blend traditional witchcraft and Christianity, you could definitely make a lot out of this book in adapting the spellwork and ritual to suit the modern times. Next up, we have Of Blood and Bones. Now, a lot of you who saw my Glastonbury haul video will have known that I got this book and I have been kind of dabbling into it. Now, I'll be honest, after reading, I think I'm 43 pages in, which is not particularly far. This book is 312 pages long. After reading a little bit that I have, the writing style isn't drawing me in. You know when there's some books where you want to read and you will sit and you will spend like 8 hours straight reading? That's not healthy, by the way, yet I think we all do it. And some books do that for me. This one really didn't. I find that I have to force myself to read, and I think it's just because the writing style isn't really what I personally go for, but once again, that is entirely a personal choice. Now, this book is all about magic associated with the dark side of the moon and just generally the dark side of life. It touches on the darker topics that a lot of books don't want to talk about, and I can really appreciate that. A lot of you will know that I speak a lot about how I really wish there was more acceptance within the witchcraft community for more baneful topics. Because if anyone says anything that isn't love, light, sunshine, and rainbows, they will be attacked by a bunch of people who say that no one should be doing any kind of baneful magic, despite the fact that for tens of thousands of years, witchcraft and other similar magical practices were used twofold, to both curse and to cure. And so I think it's really important that books on this subject are produced so that we can make our own decisions as to whether or not we as individuals feel comfortable doing the more baneful, more negative styles of magic if they become necessary. And this book really focuses on that topic. However, for me, so far, it's not dragging me in. I'm obviously going to keep reading it. I'm determined to get from cover to cover so I can really give it a full in-depth breakdown. Now, it does cover things like circle casting, as well as discussing deities and how to work with them appropriately, which is so useful. The number of books I have read that talk about working with deities and then tossing them away like used garbage is honestly kind of shocking. This book very specifically discusses how to go about working with more dark deities in an appropriate way, with invocations, offerings, connecting with them and the like. It does go into circle casting, but it is highly Wiccan in its basis, which I'll be honest, most circle casting rituals that you will see in books today are, because it's primarily what people have learned to do. It's not a bad thing, it's more just an observation. It does cover a few topics though that I'm a little bit uncertain of. The idea of shadow work without teaming it with therapy or without precautions on the subject. And it does also discuss the use of making incense out of whatever you find on the forest floor and then burning it, which, although in some locations around the world won't be too much of a problem, I mean, it sounds pretty gross. However, it's really important to remember that depending on where you live, you might have plants as well as shrubs, leaves, berries, anything else on the floor that might be very toxic to inhale. So I will say, just take everything with a pinch of salt, read through the book, see what you like, see what you don't like, don't do anything you don't feel comfortable with. I'm definitely not giving this a really hard yes or a really hard no right now. I'm just kind of tiptoeing my way through it, see how I feel about it. But because I've been ill and I've been doing other stuff and doing research for the podcast and stuff, I haven't fully dived into it yet. So I'm hoping that by the time I do another breakdown in 3 months' time, I will hopefully have finished this book, or at least have got more of the way through it, so I can give you more of my opinion on the subject. So far, it is a tentative maybe. I like the concept of the book, I'm just not sure whether I like the full completed thing yet, if that makes any sense whatsoever. And lastly, we have A Deed Without a Name by Lee Morgan. Now this has got to be one of my favourite books that I have ever read. And that really says something considering I read quite a large number of books. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved the books that I reviewed in my Beginner Witchcraft book series. A lot of those I gave really positive reviews. I will link it up here if you are interested in more book review things. Now, there were some traditional witchcraft books in that video that I loved, but this one is so good. Now, this book is called A Deed Without a Name, Unearthing the Legacy of Traditional Witchcraft. And it's a really interesting book. Whereas something like The Crooked Path, which I gave 5 stars in the past, It's still good, by the way, it's still worth 5 stars, I still love The Crooked Path. Focuses more on practical traditional witchcraft, the kind of things that you can do today. It might not be entirely accurate to the way traditional witchcraft was done traditionally or historically, but it's a really good book for discussing traditional witchcraft in a modern setting. I love that book. 5 stars. This one also gets 5 stars, but for completely different reasons. This one discusses traditional witchcraft, but in a historical way that makes sense for a modern audience. And it gave me one of the biggest, oh wow, I completely get that now, moments that I've had in a really, really long time. I'll go through the blurb a little bit so that you can know kind of what this book is on about. So the blurb goes as follows. The field of witchcraft studies is continually overturning new information and research about traditional witchcraft practices and their meanings. A Deed Without a Name seeks to weave together some of this cutting-edge research with insider information and practical know-how. Utilizing her own decades of experience in witchcraft and core shamanism, Lee Morgan pulls together information from trial records, folklore and modern testimonials to deepen our understanding of the ecstatic and visionary substrata of traditional witchcraft. Now that's not the full blurb, but that's just a good chunk of it. This book was so eye-opening to me because when we think back at the witch trials, they discuss topics such as flying to the witch's Sabbath, transforming and shape-shifting into different animals, witches being able to pass through walls and enter buildings and bedrooms and haunt people in their sleep, and we read it and we go, wow, that's a load of nonsense. When actually, it's our perspective on the subject that makes it seem like nonsense. Our modern view of the world is that the only thing that is real are the things around us, the things that we can touch, the things that we can feel, the things that we experience while we are fully awake. But historically, we didn't necessarily perceive the world in this way. Instead of just perceiving the things that we can touch, feel, and see with our waking eyes, they often perceive dreams, visions, and astral projection or astral flight to be just as real, just as valid as other forms of experiences. And so once you realize that, the testimonials of these accused make so much more sense. The idea of flying to a group setting seems less far-fetched when you realize it was probably done astrally. The idea of shape-shifting into animals wasn't something that was done necessarily physically, but it's very likely that this was done via dreams or via astral projection. And this book was so unbelievably eye-opening, I cannot even tell you. It talks about not only historical accounts, but also modern accounts. And let me tell you, some of these modern accounts made me recall my own experiences that I had just pushed away and forgotten. And it made me second guess and really think about it and think, oh wow, that was actually more than what I thought it was. And I'm blown away. I cannot wait till I have the time to read it again. Actually loved this book. It was just so eye-opening, and I'm going to have to check out any other works that they have written because I am definitely going to have to read them as well. Now, this book is quite intense. It's not to say that it's not suitable for beginners, but there are definitely topics and subjects that might be confusing if you don't already understand the wording. It's a very wordy book, and it can be quite difficult to get into if that's not the style of reading that you're used to, but it covers a whole range of fascinating topics, which includes fetch brides, grooms, spirit familiars, and plant familiars in depth. It also breaks down the witch's Sabbath in real terms and shows variations as is seen across the country. It covers some rituals and ceremonies performed by both the author and those that they have interacted with, which I've noted as being very interesting. It's overall a fantastic book. The chapters are small enough to chip away at. It's a little difficult to read if you're tired, but generally very interesting, and I wish it was longer. It covers topics such as the witch's flight, how it's done, and what reason, including entheogens and flying ointments, which is a really fascinating topic that I'm going to be focusing on more in the future. And then lastly, I do go on to say that this book covers how many forms humans have and how our worldview today doesn't align with our historical perspective, which was more shamanistic in nature, and how if we see ourselves as separate to other aspects of the world, we are not going to be able to truly understand the mindset of the people in the past. And generally, I just I just really like this book. Is it going to be suitable for everyone? No. No book is ever going to be suitable for everyone, but if you do like the style of books that I like, then this one could be a really interesting read. So all in all, I've kind of had a good balance of books this past quarter. I didn't read as many as I would typically read, probably because I spent like a good month of that just not being well at all. A lot of you will know that story if you were on the live stream. I got sick about a month ago, and yeah, that was not fun. So I ended up not reading as much as I maybe would have liked to have. But many of the books that I did read, I really liked. Now, there were a few books that I did read that I haven't mentioned about in this video, and that's because I struggled to find anything nice to say about them. Now, if you've known me for a while, you will know that I am not a very scathing person, or at least I try not to be. I try to always find some positive in everything that I read and everything that I watch, and I never want to just like be mean about something. However, there were a few books where I actually sat here for like 15 minutes trying to find a way of saying it in a nice way, and I just discovered I couldn't. So there's some books that I just don't talk about because I really don't like them so much that I can't find anything nice to say about them. And my parents told me that if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So I'm not going to. So if there's a book and I mention it briefly and then I don't say anything else about it, it's probably because I didn't like it very much. Yeah, so anyway, I hope you did enjoy this video. I hope that you found it useful. Let me know if you would like more of these videos in the future. What were your opinions on the books that I've spoken about today? Did you really like them? Did you really not like them? Were they just kind of meh? Let me know, because obviously these are only my experiences with these books. You might have completely different experiences, probably polar opposite experiences to me, depending on what your style of practice is. And that's the really important thing here. My word isn't the be-all and end-all of everything. It's simply my experiences with my own practice, my own tradition, and my own understanding when it comes to these books. And so you might have a completely different experience. And if you do, feel free to let us know in the comment section, because then we can have a better conversation about whether these books are going to be suitable for certain people depending on what they practice and what they feel like they need. Okay, if you do have any comments, concerns, questions, or video ideas, feel free to put it down in the comment section. And if you do enjoy the magical content on this channel in this video, feel free to hit subscribe. I try my best to post magical content every single week. And with that being said, I hope you have a marvelous magical day. I hope you're all staying safe, and I will see you in the next video. Bye! My hands are so red. I don't know why. I have like, I don't know, my hands are boiling, but I'm not. This is why people think I paint my face white. I promise the rest of my skin actually matches my face, just not my hands. My hands are always bright red, and they're not dry. They're just red. Strange. This was so stressful to film. This was actually so stressful. Trying to like balance out like loving a book versus hating another one. I think I'm probably going to have to cut some of these out. Like there might be some that you don't even get to see because I actually couldn't say anything nice about it. Like I was trying really, really hard to be like, well, this is okay. When really my review on this app is scathing. You can tell it was late. It was late. I'd already sat through one mediocre book, and I went in. Like I'm reading this and I'm like, damn. I was like sassy when I got round to doing this review. Like actually sassy. And I just I don't think that's going to end up in the final product, because I actually don't like being negative about a book, because as far as I'm concerned, like not everyone is going to like every book, right? That's just like general human nature. Except I actually have nothing nice to say about it, and I don't know what to do, so I probably will end up not putting it in this video. So yeah, there's that. I really hope this went okay. This has been so stressful. And now my battery is dying. Of course it is.